A single slap. That's all it took to destroy a 30-year career built on badges and lies. When Police Chief Karen Doyle saw a black man in a suit walking toward her courthouse, she didn't see a federal judge, she saw a threat. What happened in the next 60 seconds would expose decades of corruption, ignite a national firestorm, and prove that even those who wear the badge aren't above the law. Stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this truth travels. The morning air in Millbrook County carried the kind of crispness that made people believe in new beginnings. September sunlight filtered through the oak trees lining Justice Boulevard, casting long shadows across the granite steps of the federal courthouse. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the world was about to witness how quickly respect could turn to violence when prejudice wore a uniform. Marcus Langston had always believed in the power of preparation. At 52, he'd learned that being a black man in America, even a federal judge required a certain armor. Not the kind made of steel, but something more subtle: impeccable dress, flawless diction, and an unfailing composure that refused to bend even when the world pushed hard against it. This morning, he wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit tailored to perfection, with a burgundy tie that his late wife Sarah had given him on their 20th anniversary. The Italian leather briefcase in his hand contained the files for today's docket 3 civil rights cases that he'd been reviewing since 5 a.m. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, clicked against the pavement with the rhythm of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. He didn't know he was walking into a trap disguised as a Tuesday. Karen Doyle had been Millbrook County's police chief for 14 years. She'd built her career on a foundation of tough-on-crime policies that translated in practice to tough on anyone who didn't look like the people in her neighborhood. At 48, she carried herself with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no, not by the mayor who appointed her, not by the city council, who feared her, and certainly not by the community members who'd learned that complaining about Chief Doyle was a fast track to harassment. She stood at the courthouse entrance that morning because she'd received a tip, anonymous, she'd claim later, about a suspicious individual planning to disrupt court proceedings. The truth was simpler and uglier. She'd seen Marcus Langston's car in the parking lot, a sleek black Mercedes with out-of-state plates, and decided that someone like that didn't belong here. "Rodriguez Davis on me," she barked into her radio, her eyes fixed on the figure approaching from the west entrance. Officer Miguel Rodriguez was 28 and had learned early that questioning Chief Doyle meant career suicide. He'd watched 3 good cops transfer out after challenging her methods. He'd keep his head down, collect his paycheck, and try not to think about the promises he'd made to his mother about being one of the good ones. Officer Jennifer Davis, 31, had different reasons for loyalty. She'd been passed over for promotion twice before Doyle took her under her wing. Now, she was the chief's right hand, and she'd convinced herself that the ends order safety control justified whatever means were necessary. They flanked Doyle as Marcus reached the bottom step of the courthouse. "Stop right there!" Doyle's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Marcus paused, his hand on the brass railing. He'd been a judge for 8 years, a prosecutor for 12 before that, and a public defender for 6 before that. 26 years in the legal system had taught him to recognize that tone, the one that said someone had already decided you were guilty, and the trial was just theater. He turned slowly, his expression neutral, his movements deliberate. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you?" "I'll ask the questions." Doyle stepped forward, her hand resting on her service weapon. "What's your business here?" Marcus measured his words carefully. He could end this in seconds, flash his credentials, watch her face drain of color, walk inside to his chambers. But something in her posture, in the way she positioned herself like a predator, made him curious. How far would she go? "I have business in the courthouse," he replied evenly. "What kind of business?" Doyle pressed closer. "You got an appointment. A lawyer expecting you." "I don't need an appointment." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Something felt wrong about this. The man's suit probably cost more than Rodriguez's monthly salary. His briefcase was real leather, not the knockoff stuff. and his voice calm, educated, completely unintimidated, didn't match the profile Doyle was painting. "Chief," Rodriguez ventured quietly, Maybe you should shut up and do your job," Doyle snapped, never taking her eyes off Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification." Marcus set his briefcase down carefully on the step. "Am I being detained?" "You're being questioned. There's a difference." "Is there—" Marcus allowed the faintest smile to touch his lips. "Because from where I'm standing, 3 armed officers blocking my path to a public building feels a lot like detention. And unless you have reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime, you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Doyle's face flushed red. "You think you're smart? You think throwing around fancy words makes you better than us?" "I think," Marcus said softly, "that I have every right to enter that courthouse, and you have no legal authority to stop me." "We got a call about a suspicious person matching your description," Davis interjected, stepping beside Doyle. "So yeah, we have reasonable suspicion." "Interesting." Marcus's voice remained maddeningly calm. "What description would that be?" "Black man in a suit." "That's not reasonable suspicion, Officer Davis. That's profiling." "Don't you dare lecture me about profiling." Doyle's voice rose sharply. "I've been protecting this community for 14 years while people like you—" "People like me," Marcus interrupted gently. "Please, Chief Doyle, finish that thought. I'm genuinely curious what you mean by people like me." The air between them crackled with tension. A few early courthouse workers had stopped on the steps above, phones out recording. Marcus noticed but didn't acknowledge them. Doyle was too focused on her target to see the witnesses gathering. "You come rolling up here in your fancy car, your expensive suit, thinking you own the place," Doyle hissed. "We know your type. Drug money probably, or fraud. You're either here to intimidate a witness or con some lawyer into taking your dirty case." "That's quite a story you've constructed," Marcus said. "Based on what evidence? My car, my suit? Or is it something else, something you're not quite willing to say out loud?" Rodriguez touched Doyle's arm. "Chief, this isn't—" She shook him off violently. "I said shut up. This punk thinks he can waltz into our courthouse like he owns it. Well, I've got news for you, friend. Not on my watch." Marcus picked up his briefcase slowly. "Chief Doyle, I'm going to walk into that courthouse now. You can either step aside or you can physically restrain me, which I strongly advise against." "Oh, you're advising me now." Doyle laughed harshly. "Let me tell you what I advise. I advise you turn around and get back in that drug dealer car before this goes somewhere you don't want it to go." "A drug dealer car?" Marcus's voice was soft, almost sad. "A Mercedes. Because black men can only afford nice things through crime. Is that your logic?" "I know your kind," Doyle shouted. The veneer of professional authority was cracking now, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. "You think you can come into our towns, our buildings with your attitude and your disrespect?" "I haven't disrespected anyone," Marcus said. "I've simply asserted my rights. If that feels like disrespect to you, Chief, that says more about your expectations than my behavior." That's when Doyle snapped. "You want to talk about rights?" She stepped so close Marcus could smell the coffee on her breath. "Here's a right for you. I have the right to protect this courthouse from thugs and criminals. I'm neither of those things." "Prove it. Show me ID now." "Am I under arrest?" "You're about to be if you don't comply." "On what charge?" "Obstruction, trespassing, assault on an officer." Marcus's eyebrow rose. "I haven't touched you, Chief." "Yet." Doyle's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "But you were about to. I saw it." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Chief, he didn't—" "Rodriguez, one more word, and you're suspended. Davis, get his ID." Davis moved toward Marcus, her hand extended. "Sir, please cooperate." Marcus stood perfectly still, his arm still in Doyle's grip. "Officer Davis, your chief just committed battery by grabbing me without legal justification. If you assist in this illegal detention, you become equally liable." Stop twisting things around. Doyle tightened her grip. You people always do this play. The victim cry. Racism make everything about your feelings instead of the law. The law. Marcus's voice carried a weight now that made Davis hesitate. Chief, I've dedicated my entire adult life to the law. I know it better than most, and right now you're breaking it. I'm enforcing it, Doyle screamed. The mask was completely off now, her face contorted with rage. And I'm sick and tired of having to justify myself to people who don't belong. She caught herself, but too late. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. People who don't belong, Marcus repeated quietly. In our courthouse, in our town. Is that what you meant to say? Damn right. Doyle had gone past the point of control. This is our town, our courthouse, and we decide who belongs here. Actually, Marcus said, federal law decides that. The Constitution decides that. And neither of them include a provision for Chief Doyle's personal feelings about who looks right. The slap came so fast that the watching crowd gasped in unison. Doyle's palm connected with Marcus's face with a crack that echoed off the courthouse walls. His head snapped to the side, the briefcase dropping from his hand papers scattering across the steps. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Marcus stood frozen, one hand rising slowly to touch his burning cheek. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, where his tooth had cut the inside of his lip. He could taste copper, could feel the heat radiating from where her hand had struck. Rodriguez stared in horror. Davis's mouth hung open. The crowd above had gone silent, phones still recording every second. And Karen Doyle stood there, chest heaving, her hand still raised, realizing too late what she'd done, but too proud to take it back. You assaulted me, Marcus said softly, his voice carrying a terrible calm. In front of witnesses, on camera. You just committed a federal crime. You were resisting, Doyle shouted, but her voice had lost its certainty. You were Davis, you saw it. He tried to push past me. Chief, he was just standing there, Davis whispered. He didn't. Are you calling me a liar? Doyle whirled on her. He assaulted me. I was defending myself. There's no need to compound your crime with perjury, Marcus said. He bent down, gathering his scattered papers with deliberate care, giving his hands something to do before they started shaking. Not from fear, from rage so pure, it threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. You're under arrest, Doyle declared suddenly, for assault on a police officer, trespassing, and terroristic threats. Terroristic threats. Marcus straightened papers clutched to his chest. Chief Doyle, I haven't threatened anyone. You threatened the safety of this courthouse. Rodriguez, cuff him. Rodriguez didn't move. Chief, I don't think. That's an order, officer. Chief Doyle. Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I strongly suggest you stop this right now. Call your supervisor. Contact the FBI field office. Do anything except continue down this path, because I promise you, it ends somewhere you cannot imagine. The only thing ending here is your freedom. Doyle grabbed the handcuffs from her belt. You want to play games? You want to quote the Constitution at me? Let's see how well you know your rights when you're sitting in county lockup. She moved toward him, and Marcus made a decision. He could reveal who he was. Right now, pull out his federal credentials. Watch her realize her career was over. But something darker, something that had been building through years of microaggressions and subtle dismissals, and the constant weight of being judged by his skin before his character wanted to see how far she would go. How far would the system let her go before someone stopped her? So he let her approach, let her roughly spin him around, let her yank his arms behind his back with unnecessary force. You have the right to remain silent. She began, her voice shaking with adrenaline and rage. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, cold steel biting into skin that had never known their touch before. You have the right to an attorney. She continued, shoving him toward the police cruiser parked at the curb. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. Oh, I can afford one, Marcus said quietly. Trust me on that. The crowd had grown now. Someone was shouting, "That's Judge Langston! That's Judge Langston!" But Doyle wasn't listening. Or maybe she thought it was a ploy, a lie from a desperate suspect. Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Chief, those people are saying he's a judge." "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England," Doyle snorted. "Get in the car." She shoved Marcus toward the open door. Marcus looked back at the courthouse. His courthouse where his nameplate sat on a desk in chambers on the 4th floor, where his law clerk was probably wondering why he was late for their 9 a.m. case conference. The morning sun reflected off the brass lettering above the entrance, Millbrook County Federal Courthouse. Soon, that name would change. He ducked his head and slid into the back seat, the position awkward, with his hands cuffed behind him. Doyle slammed the door with enough force to rock the car. "Davis, you drive," Doyle ordered. "Rodriguez follow in the 2nd unit. We're taking him straight to booking." "Chief, shouldn't we at least check his ID?" Rodriguez tried one more time. "Just to be sure. I don't need to check anything," Doyle snapped. "I know a con when I see one, probably carrying fake credentials anyway. I've seen it before. These guys get fake police badges, fake IDs, thinking it'll get them out of trouble." She climbed into the passenger seat, turning to look at Marcus through the wire mesh divider. "You picked the wrong courthouse friend, and you definitely picked the wrong police chief." Marcus met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "You're right about that, Chief Doyle. I definitely did." Something in his tone made her uneasy, but she shook it off. She'd been doing this too long to doubt herself now. She knew what she saw: a black man who didn't belong, who needed to be taught a lesson about respect and authority. As the cruiser pulled away from the courthouse, Marcus turned his head to look back one more time. The crowd had grown larger, people pointing, phones recording. In a few hours, the footage would be everywhere: local news, social media, maybe even national coverage. But Karen Doyle didn't know that yet. She was too busy mentally composing her report, crafting the narrative that would justify what she'd done. She'd write that he was aggressive, that he'd made threatening movements, that she'd had no choice but to use force. Her officers would back her up, they always did. The system would believe her, it always did. Or so she thought. The ride to the county jail took 12 minutes. For Marcus, handcuffed in the back seat, feeling the sting on his face where she'd struck him, it felt longer. He used the time to breathe, to center himself, to remember every detail. The time on the dashboard clock when she grabbed him, 8:54 a.m. The badge number on Rodriguez's chest, 2D847. The crack in Davis's voice when she'd tried to question the chief. Every detail mattered. Every second was evidence. At the jail, Doyle hauled him out of the car personally, one hand tight on his arm, as she marched him through the entrance. The booking sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Tom Morrison, looked up from his computer and froze. "Chief, is that—" "Not another word, Morrison." Doyle cut him off. "Just process him. Assault on an officer, trespassing on federal property, terroristic threats, and resisting arrest." Morrison's eyes widened. He'd worked courthouse security before this job. He knew the judges knew their routines, and he knew Judge Marcus Langston's face. "Chief Doyle," he said carefully, "I really think we should process him now." Each word was a hammer strike. "Or I'll find someone who will." Morrison looked at Marcus, who gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet. Let it play out." With shaking hands, Morrison began the intake process. Fingerprints. Photograph front and profile, the red mark on Marcus's face clearly visible. Personal property inventory. "Empty your pockets," Doyle ordered. Marcus couldn't with his hands still cuffed. Davis had to do it, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out his wallet, his phone, his keys. And then from the inside breast pocket, a leather credential case. She opened it and the blood drained from her face. "Chief," she whispered. "Chief, you need to see this." "What now?" Doyle snatched it from her hand, then stared at the federal judge's credentials, complete with Marcus Langston's photograph, his title, and the seal of the United States District Court. For the first time since 8:47 that morning, doubt crossed her face. "It's fake," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Has to be. Morrison called down to the courthouse verify this ID." Morrison didn't need to call. "Chief Doyle, that's Judge Langston. I've seen him in court dozens of times. That's really him." The room went silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the building. "Chief Doyle, would you like to revise your report? Or should we continue with this theatrical production?" Doyle's face cycled through emotions: disbelief, horror, calculation, and finally, defiance. She'd gone too far to back down now. Admitting the truth meant admitting she'd assaulted a federal judge based on nothing but racial profiling. So she made a choice that would seal her fate. "I don't care who he claims to be," she said loudly for the benefit of the room. "He assaulted me. I saw what I saw. Fake credentials don't change that." "They're not fake," Morrison protested. "Chief, that's really—" "One more word and you're suspended," Doyle screamed. "All of you. This man assaulted me, and we're going to do this by the book. He gets charged, he gets arraigned, and then we'll sort out whether his fancy fake ID holds up in court." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. So that's how she wanted to play it. Double down on the lie, fabricate evidence, use her authority to cover up the truth. He'd seen it before, testified about it in civil rights cases, written opinions condemning it. But he'd never experienced it personally. Never felt the full weight of the system turning against him, despite his position, despite his credentials, despite everything he'd achieved. "I want to make a phone call," he said quietly. "You'll make a call when I say you can make a call," Doyle shot back. "Chief," Rodriguez said from the doorway, "he has a right to. Get out, all of you out." Doyle was unraveling now, her voice rising to a shriek. "This is my arrest, my jurisdiction. We're doing this my way." But it was already too late. Morrison had quietly pressed the panic button under his desk, not because he feared violence, but because he knew this had spiraled beyond anyone's control. Within minutes, the jail supervisor arrived, then the county sheriff, then inevitably someone from the courthouse who confirmed what Morrison already knew. The man in handcuffs was federal judge Marcus Langston. And his career was about to become a case study in everything wrong with American law enforcement. The county sheriff, William Patterson, had 32 years of law enforcement experience, which meant he'd seen enough corruption to recognize it instantly and enough politics to know when to tread carefully. He walked into the booking area at 9:17 a.m., took one look at the handcuffed man in the expensive suit with federal credentials spread across Morrison's desk, and felt his blood pressure spike. "Someone want to tell me," Patterson said slowly, his Texas drawl stretching each word, "why we have a federal judge in restraints?" Doyle stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Sheriff, this man assaulted me outside the courthouse. When I attempted to question him about suspicious behavior, he became violent and threatening. I had no choice but to use necessary force and place him under arrest." Patterson's eyes moved from Doyle to Marcus, taking in the red mark on his face, the blood at the corner of his mouth, the way he stood perfectly still with his hands cuffed behind his back. Then he looked at Rodriguez and Davis, both of whom suddenly found the floor fascinating. "Judge Langston," Patterson said, ignoring Doyle entirely. "Are you injured?" "Nothing permanent." "Sheriff?" Marcus replied, his voice carrying that same unsettling calm it had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Though I would appreciate having these handcuffs removed." "Morrison, get those cuffs off him right now," Patterson ordered. "And someone get the man some water and a first aid kit." "Sheriff, I must protest," Doyle said. "This man is under arrest for—" "I heard what you said he's under arrest for." Patterson cut her off. "I'm just trying to figure out how a federal judge walking into his own courthouse became a suspect in anything." Morrison moved quickly to unlock the handcuffs. Marcus brought his hands forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had left red marks. A corrections officer appeared with a bottle of water and a small medical kit, but Marcus waved them away politely. "I'm fine," he said, "but I would like to make a statement." "Absolutely not." Doyle stepped between Marcus and Patterson. "Sheriff, with all due respect, this is my arrest, my jurisdiction. The suspect—" "He's not a suspect, Karen." Patterson's use of her first name was deliberate, a reminder that despite her title, she didn't outrank him in this building. "He's a federal judge, and unless you've got rock-solid evidence that he committed a crime, we're looking at a lawsuit that's going to cost this county everything." "I have evidence." Doyle's voice rose sharply. "I have witnesses. My officers saw everything." Patterson looked at Rodriguez and Davis. "That true? You saw Judge Langston assault Chief Doyle?" Rodriguez opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. The moment of truth had arrived faster than he'd expected, and he wasn't ready for it. He thought about his mother, about the promises he'd made, about the difference between keeping your head down and selling your soul. He began, then felt Doyle's eyes boring into him. The situation escalated quickly. "That's not what I asked, Officer Rodriguez. Did you see the judge strike Chief Doyle?" The silence stretched like taffy. Davis jumped in before Rodriguez could answer. "The chief felt threatened," she said quickly. "Judge Langston was being confrontational, refusing to comply with lawful orders. When Chief Doyle attempted to detain him for questioning, he made aggressive movements." "Aggressive movements," Patterson repeated flatly. "Officer Davis, do you know who Judge Langston is?" "I do now," Davis said. "But at the time we didn't know. We were responding to a report of a suspicious individual." "What report?" Marcus spoke for the first time since the handcuffs came off. "I'd like to see this report. Timestamp caller information, the specific description that was allegedly provided." Doyle's face tightened. "That information is part of an ongoing investigation." "There is no investigation," Marcus said quietly. "There's only what happened at 8:54 this morning, when you grabbed my arm without probable cause, struck me across the face without legal justification, and arrested me based solely on the color of my skin and your assumption that I didn't belong in my own courthouse." "That's a lie." Doyle's composure cracked further. "I never race, had nothing to do with this. You were acting suspicious. You refused to identify yourself. You made threatening statements." "I asked if I was being detained," Marcus said. "That's not a threatening statement. That's a constitutional question. And when you couldn't provide legal justification for stopping me, you escalated to violence. You're twisting everything." Doyle looked around the room, wildly seeking support. "Sheriff, this is exactly what he did at the courthouse, playing the victim, making everything about race when this is about law and order." "Then let's talk about law and order," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You grabbed me without reasonable suspicion. That's battery. You struck me in the face. That's assault. You arrested me without probable cause. That's false imprisonment. And you did all of this while I was attempting to enter a federal building to perform my duties as a federal judge. That's obstruction of justice." He paused, letting each charge land like a gavel strike. "And now you're fabricating evidence to cover it up. That's conspiracy to violate my civil rights under color of law." Title 18, Section 2 and 42 of the United States Code, punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, or life if bodily injury results. The room had gone silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of metal doors clanging somewhere in the jail. Patterson rubbed his face with both hands. "Chief Doyle, I'm going to strongly suggest you stop talking right now and call your union rep." "I don't need a union rep." Doyle's voice was shrill now. "I didn't do anything wrong. This man is lying, and you're all buying it because of who he is." "No," Marcus said softly. "You're in trouble because of what you did. My title doesn't change the facts. It just means I know exactly what laws you broke and exactly how to prove it." Patterson made a decision. Judge Langston, if you want to press charges against Chief Doyle, we can start that process right now. Before Marcus could answer, Doyle exploded. You can't do that. I'm the victim here. He assaulted me. Then where are your injuries? Patterson asked. Judge Langston has visible marks on his face. You don't have a scratch. Because I defended myself before he could hurt me. With the slap that a dozen witnesses recorded on their phones. Marcus's tone remained maddeningly calm. The slap that's probably already viral on social media. That defensive action. Doyle's face went white. What witnesses? The courthouse employees standing on the steps above us, Marcus said. The people walking by on the street. The security cameras on the building. And of course Officer Rodriguez's body camera, which was activated the entire time. All eyes turned to Rodriguez, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Is that true, officer? Patterson asked. Was your camera on? Rodriguez's hand moved unconsciously to the small device clipped to his chest. Yes, sir. Department policy requires activation for all citizen interactions. Perfect, Marcus said. That footage will show exactly what happened. No interpretations, no conflicting testimonies, just facts. Doyle lunged at Rodriguez so fast that Davis barely caught her arm. You recorded this. Why didn't you tell me your camera was on? It's always on, Chief, Rodriguez said quietly. That's the policy you implemented. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Doyle's own department regulations had just become evidence against her. I want that footage, Patterson said. Right now. That's evidence in my case, Doyle protested. You can't just... It's evidence in a potential federal civil rights violation, Marcus corrected. Which means it's subject to immediate preservation under federal law. Sheriff Patterson has not just the right, but the obligation to secure it before it's accidentally deleted or corrupted. Patterson pulled out his phone. I'm calling the FBI field office. No. Doyle grabbed for his phone, then realized what she'd done and pulled back. I mean, that's premature. We should handle this internally first. Departmental review may be a civilian oversight board hearing. You want to handle a federal judge's assault complaint internally? Patterson's voice dripped with disbelief. Karen, what the hell are you thinking? I'm thinking that rushing to judgment helps no one. Doyle was sweating now, her uniform showing dark patches under the arms. We need time to review all the evidence, interview all the witnesses, get the full picture. The full picture, Marcus said, is that you racially profiled me, assaulted me, arrested me without cause, and are now attempting to obstruct a federal investigation. Every minute you keep talking, you're adding charges. Doyle turned to Davis desperately. Tell them what really happened. Davis hesitated. She'd built her career on loyalty to Doyle, had convinced herself that the chief's methods, however harsh, were necessary to maintain order. But standing here watching her mentor unravel, seeing the federal judge with the mark of Doyle's hand still visible on his face, Davis felt something crack inside her. She started, then stopped. Chief, maybe we should... Tell the truth, Officer Davis, Marcus said gently. That's all anyone's asking. What did you actually see? Davis looked at Doyle, then at Marcus, then at her own hands. I saw Chief Doyle grab you, and then I saw her hit you. You saw wrong, Doyle screamed. He grabbed me first. Chief, I know what I saw. Davis said, her voice barely above a whisper. And the cameras will show the same thing. Doyle stared at her like she'd been stabbed. After everything I did for you, I promoted you, I mentored you, you taught me to cover for you. Davis said, the words coming faster now like a dam breaking. You taught me that loyalty mattered more than truth, that protecting the department mattered more than protecting people's rights. But I can't, her voice broke. I can't lie for you about this. You ungrateful... Doyle caught herself, but the venom in her voice had already been heard. Rodriguez found his voice too. Chief Officer Davis is right. The judge didn't do anything wrong. He just wanted to walk into the courthouse. "Both of you are suspended," Doyle shrieked. "Turn in your badges right now." "You don't have the authority to suspend them," Patterson said wearily. "Not for refusing to lie under oath, which is where this is heading." Marcus watched the scene unfold with something close to sadness. He'd seen this before, people so invested in their own righteousness that they couldn't recognize when they'd crossed the line from enforcing the law to breaking it. Doyle genuinely believed she was the victim here, that the system was being turned against her unfairly. She couldn't see that she was the system, and that the system had failed. "Sheriff Patterson," Marcus said, "I appreciate your intervention, but I think it's important that we let Chief Doyle finish booking me." Everyone stared at him. "What?" Doyle said. "You arrested me," Marcus explained patiently. "You filed charges. Let's see those charges through the proper legal process. Book me completely. Take my fingerprints, my photograph, write up your report with all the details about how I supposedly assaulted you. Put it all on record." Patterson frowned. "Judge, I don't think that's—" "I want every step documented," Marcus continued. "I want Chief Doyle's sworn statement. I want the arrest report with her signature. I want the chain of evidence preserved exactly as it would be for any other defendant." Understanding dawned on Patterson's face. Marcus wasn't just defending himself, he was building an airtight case. Every false statement Doyle made, every lie she put in writing, would become evidence of perjury and conspiracy. "You want enough rope," Patterson said quietly. "I want the truth on record," Marcus corrected. "Whatever form that takes." Doyle's eyes narrowed. She wasn't stupid. She'd risen to police chief through a combination of political skill and ruthless calculation. She recognized a trap when she saw one. But she'd already committed. The arrest was public. The charges were filed. Backing down now meant admitting she'd been wrong, and Doyle had never admitted being wrong in her life. "Fine," she said. "Morrison, continue the booking process. I'll file my complete report within the hour." "Make sure it's thorough," Marcus suggested. "Include every detail about why you stopped me, what I said, what you said, what actions I took that you interpreted as threatening. Be as specific as possible." "Don't tell me how to write my report," Doyle snapped. "I'm not telling you," Marcus said. "I'm advising you, because that report will be examined by federal investigators, federal prosecutors, and eventually a federal jury. Every word will matter." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you of the legal process that's about to unfold. There's a difference." Morrison stepped forward hesitantly. "Judge Langston, I need to finish the intake process. I'm really sorry about this." "You're doing your job, Mr. Morrison. No apology necessary." Marcus extended his hands for the fingerprinting. Morrison rolled each finger across the ink pad, and then the card, the process surreal in its mundane criminality. How many times had Marcus reviewed these same cards in his chamber's evidence in criminal cases, never imagining his own prints would be taken this way? "All right," Morrison said when he'd finished. "Now the photo." Marcus stood against the height chart on the wall, the numbers running up behind his head like a ladder to nowhere. Morrison raised the camera. "Wait," Doyle said suddenly. "Don't forget to photograph his injuries." "What injuries?" Morrison asked. "The ones from when he resisted arrest," Doyle said. "The scratches on his hands, the bruising on his wrists. Make sure it's all documented." Marcus held up his hands. "The only marks on my wrists are from your handcuffs, Chief, which Officer Davis applied with excessive force." "That's not true," Davis protested. "I used standard procedure." "Then the marks should be minimal," Marcus said calmly. "But they're not. They're deep, which suggests the cuffs were intentionally tightened beyond necessary restraint. That's going in my complaint too." Morrison photographed the marks on Marcus's wrists, then the red welt on his face, then the split lip. Each flash of the camera felt like a small explosion of light, freezing moments of humiliation for the record. "Now the standard booking photo," Morrison said. Face forward, neutral expression. Click. Marcus staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Turn to your right. Click. The profile shot showing the swelling on his cheek. Okay, Morrison said, setting down the camera. That's everything except the report. Chief Doyle, you'll need to— I know what I need to do, Doyle interrupted. She turned to Davis and Rodriguez. You two with me. We're writing this up together. Actually, Patterson interjected, standard procedure for an incident like this is separate statements, to avoid any appearance of coordination. There's nothing to coordinate, Doyle said. We all saw the same thing. Then your statements should match without needing to coordinate, Marcus observed. Doyle glared at him, then stalked toward the door. Conference room, now, both of you. Rodriguez and Davis followed, moving like condemned prisoners to execution. The door closed behind them, leaving Marcus alone with Patterson and Morrison. Patterson sighed deeply. Judge, I'm sorry this happened in our county. It could have happened anywhere, Sheriff. This isn't about Millbrook County. It's about a system that allows people like Chief Doyle to operate with impunity until they go too far. She's gone too far before, Morrison said quietly. Both men looked at him. I've worked courthouse security. I've seen how she treats certain defendants, but they're criminals, easy to dismiss their complaints. Nobody listens when a drug dealer says he got roughed up. Except some of those drug dealers probably told the truth, Marcus said. And their complaints were ignored because people like me, judges, prosecutors, juries assumed the police wouldn't lie. You think she's done this before? Patterson asked. I know she has, Marcus said. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was practiced behavior. The way she immediately fabricated a narrative, the way she expected her officers to support her lies, the way she assumed the system would believe her over me, that comes from experience. Through the window of the conference room across the hall, they could see Doyle gesturing wildly, while Rodriguez and Davis sat with their heads down writing. What do you think she's telling them to write? Morrison wondered. A story, Marcus said. A story where I'm the aggressor, where she's the hero protecting the courthouse from a dangerous intruder. She'll claim I refused to identify myself, which is true because I wasn't legally required to. She'll claim I made threatening statements, which I didn't, but she'll reframe my constitutional questions as threats. She'll claim she feared for her safety, which justifies the use of force. Will it work? Patterson asked. It would have, Marcus said, if I were anyone else. If I were just a black man in a suit without credentials, without knowledge of the law, without resources to fight back, her story would have been believed without question. I would have been convicted, probably pled out to avoid trial, and my complaint against her would have been dismissed as the angry ramblings of a criminal trying to avoid responsibility. The weight of that truth settled over them. How many others had Doyle done this to? How many people were sitting in prison right now because she'd fabricated evidence against them? 30 minutes later, Doyle emerged from the conference room with 3 sheets of paper. She slapped them on Morrison's desk. Arrest report, use of force report, and witness statements, she announced. All signed and witnessed. Judge Langston is formally charged with assault on a police officer in the 2nd degree, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. He's to be held pending arraignment. Patterson picked up the report, scanning them quickly. His face grew progressively darker as he read. This says he punched you in the stomach, he said to Doyle. He did. Where's the injury? I was wearing a vest. It absorbed the impact. This says he attempted to grab your service weapon. He did. I prevented him from reaching it. Patterson looked at Marcus. Any of this true, Judge? Not a word, Marcus said evenly. But it's a good story. Dramatic. Scary. Designed to justify the use of force and explain away any evidence to the contrary. The body camera footage will prove I'm telling the truth, Doyle said confidently. Then let's watch it right now, Patterson suggested. For the first time, genuine fear crossed Doyle's face. "The footage needs to be preserved as evidence. We can't just watch it here." "Actually, we can," Rodriguez said from behind her. He'd followed her out of the conference room, his face pale but resolute. "I can download it to a secure laptop right now." "Officer Rodriguez, you're suspended," Doyle said sharply. "You're not authorized to—" "I'm not suspended," Rodriguez said. "You don't have that authority. Remember? And preservation of evidence is part of my duty. I'd be violating policy if I didn't secure this footage immediately." He moved to a computer terminal, pulling out his body camera and connecting it with a cable. The screen flickered to life, showing a menu of recorded files. "Here," Rodriguez said, clicking on the timestamp from 8:47 that morning. "This is everything." They gathered around the screen: Patterson, Morrison, Marcus, Doyle, Davis, and Rodriguez. The video began playing, the fish-eye lens of the body camera capturing the courthouse steps and the well-dressed man approaching. Marcus heard his own voice. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you?" Then Doyle's response. "I'll ask the questions. What's your business here?" The conversation played out exactly as Marcus remembered, each word preserved in digital clarity. When they reached the moment where Doyle grabbed his arm, Patterson inhaled sharply. "Stop right there," Doyle commanded, pointing at the screen. "See? He was reaching for something. I had to act." "He was reaching for his briefcase that he'd set down," Patterson said. "Keep playing." The slap came next, the sound of it crisp and unmistakable through the camera's microphone. Marcus's head snapping to the side, blood appearing at his lip. "That," Patterson said, freezing the frame, "is not self-defense. That's assault." "He was about to attack me," Doyle insisted. "I saw it in his eyes." "The camera doesn't see intentions, Chief. It sees actions. And the only action here is you striking an unarmed man who was attempting to comply with your orders." They watched the rest in silence. The arrest, the handcuffs, Marcus being forced into the car. At no point did the video show him being aggressive, threatening, or resistant. When it ended, Doyle tried one more time. "The angle doesn't show everything. From where I was standing." "From where you were standing, you racially profiled a federal judge and then assaulted him when he questioned your authority," Marcus said. His voice was still calm, but now it carried the full weight of judicial authority. "And then you compounded that crime by filing a false report full of lies that are directly contradicted by video evidence." "I didn't lie." Doyle's voice broke. "I told the truth as I saw it." "You told the truth as you needed it to be to justify your actions," Marcus corrected. "That's not the same thing." Patterson set the reports down. "Chief Doyle, I'm officially recommending to the county attorney that charges be filed against you for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and filing a false report. I'm also notifying the FBI of a potential civil rights violation." "You can't do this to me." Doyle's face crumpled. "I've given 14 years to this county. I've kept people safe. You've abused your authority," Patterson said quietly. "And now you're going to face the consequences." Marcus watched her break down, watched the reality finally penetrate her defenses. Part of him felt pity. She'd destroyed her entire life in less than 20 minutes because she couldn't see past her own prejudice. But a larger part of him thought about all the people she'd done this to before. All the lives she'd ruined, all the injustices she'd perpetrated that never came to light because her victims didn't have his resources or his platform. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said, "I believe you still have my personal property." Morrison quickly gathered Marcus's wallet, phone keys, and credentials, sliding them across the desk. "Again, Judge, I'm so sorry." "None of this is your fault," Marcus assured him. He turned to Patterson. "Sheriff, I'll be filing formal complaints through the proper federal channels. But first, I have a courthouse to get to. I believe I'm late for a 9 a.m. conference." He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at Karen Doyle, who stood with her head in her hands, her career in ruins around her feet. "Chief Doyle," he said quietly, "I want you to remember something. This isn't happening to you because you're white and I'm black. It's happening because you broke the law. Justice doesn't see color. It sees actions and consequences. I hope someday you'll understand the difference." Then Judge Marcus Langston walked out of the Millbrook County Jail, climbed into his Mercedes, and drove back to the courthouse where his nameplate waited in chambers where justice would be served with or without him, but where today it would be served because of him. Behind him, Karen Doyle's world continued its collapse, each piece falling with the inexorable certainty of a carefully constructed legal case coming together. And in his pocket, Marcus's phone buzzed with notifications. The videos had gone viral. The nation was watching. And the reckoning had only just begun. By the time Marcus pulled into the courthouse parking lot, his phone had logged 347 notifications. The video from the courthouse steps had been shared 22,000 times. Local news vans were setting up satellite dishes on the street. And his law clerk, Sarah Chen, was standing at the main entrance, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past 2 hours. "Judge Langston." She rushed down the steps as he got out of the car. "Oh my God, are you all right? We saw the videos, and then we heard you'd been arrested and nobody knew what was happening." "I'm fine, Sarah," Marcus said, though the swelling on his face suggested otherwise. "Has Judge Parker been notified?" "He's in his chambers. He wants to see you immediately." Sarah fell into step beside him as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Judge, the whole building is in chaos. The media is calling nonstop. The circuit court administrator has called twice. And," she lowered her voice, "the FBI is already here." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "Good. They'll want my statement while everything's fresh." They entered through the main doors, and Marcus felt a strange sensation walking through the metal detectors he'd passed through 1,000 times before. The security guards, men and women he greeted every morning, stared at him with expressions mixing horror, sympathy, and something else. Vindication, maybe. How many of them had dealt with Doyle's department over the years and felt powerless to challenge her? "Judge Langston." Officer Thomas Wilson, the head of courthouse security, approached quickly. "Sir, I just want to say, what happened this morning was wrong. We all saw it from the security monitors. We called Sheriff Patterson immediately, but—" "You did exactly what you should have done, Thomas," Marcus assured him. "This isn't on you." "It's on all of us," Wilson said quietly. "We've watched her operate that way for years and never said anything because—" He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. "Because she was the police chief, and who would believe courthouse security over her?" Marcus touched his shoulder briefly. "That ends today." Judge Walter Parker's chambers occupied the corner office on the 6th floor, larger than Marcus's own, befitting a senior district judge with 40 years on the bench. Parker had been appointed by President Reagan, survived 3 different chief judges, and presided over some of the most important civil rights cases in the state's history. He was also Marcus's mentor, the man who'd encouraged him to apply for the federal bench 8 years ago. Parker stood when Marcus entered, his normally stern face crumbling into concern. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, sit down before you fall down." "I'm all right, Walter." "You're not all right. You've got a handprint on your face and you just spent 2 hours in county lockup." Parker moved to a sidebar and poured 2 glasses of scotch, despite it being barely past 10 in the morning. "Drink." Marcus accepted the glass, but didn't drink. "I need to file formal complaints. Federal civil rights violations, assault under color of law, conspiracy to—" "Already done," Parker interrupted. "FBI Special Agent Reeves is in Conference Room B with the U.S. Attorney. They're preparing warrants for Doyle, her officers, and anyone else involved. The whole damn thing is on video, Marcus. Open and shut." "Good." Marcus finally took a sip of the scotch, feeling it burn down his throat. "What about the arrest warrant she filed against me?" Parker's face darkened. "Quashed. I voided it personally 20 minutes ago. The charges against you are dismissed with prejudice, and I've ordered the arrest record sealed and expunged. It's like it never happened." "Except it did happen," Marcus said softly. "And I don't want it erased. I want it on record. I want every document, every photograph, every lie she told preserved as evidence. Parker studied him carefully. "You're going to trial." "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else," Marcus corrected. "If I let this disappear quietly, if I accept an apology and a settlement, what changes? Doyle gets fired, maybe does some jail time, and the system moves on. But the system that allowed her to operate with impunity for 14 years, that stays intact." "You want to burn it all down?" "I want to rebuild it properly," Marcus said. "And sometimes that requires clearing the foundation first." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah poked her head in. "Judge Langston, I'm sorry, but there's a situation developing in Courtroom 4. Judge Morrison is requesting your presence." Marcus frowned. "Judge Morrison? Why would he?" "Chief Doyle is being arraigned," Sarah said quietly. "They fast-tracked it. She's being charged with assault, battery, false imprisonment, and federal civil rights violations. The arraignment starts in 15 minutes. Parker and Marcus exchanged glances. "That was fast," Parker said. "The U.S. Attorney doesn't mess around when there's video evidence and a federal judge as the victim," Marcus observed. "Walter, I should go." "The hell you should," Parker said firmly. "You're the victim in this case. You can't sit on the bench for her arraignment. It's a conflict of interest." "I'm not planning to preside," Marcus said. "But I am planning to attend. As a citizen and victim, I have that right." Parker opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. "You're going to sit in the gallery and watch her get arraigned for assaulting you." "I'm going to witness the system working the way it's supposed to," Marcus corrected. "For once." Courtroom 4 was packed when Marcus arrived. News crews weren't allowed inside, but sketch artists sat in the front row, charcoal moving quickly across paper. The gallery held a mix of courthouse staff, off-duty lawyers who'd heard about the emergency arraignment, and citizens who'd seen the viral videos and wanted to witness justice firsthand. The crowd parted slightly when Marcus entered, people recognizing him from the videos or from seeing him in the courthouse. He moved to a seat in the back corner, deliberately choosing a spot where he could observe without becoming the center of attention. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out. The Honorable Judge Elizabeth Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was 63, a former prosecutor, known for her no-nonsense approach and zero tolerance for police misconduct. She'd ruled against law enforcement in qualified immunity cases more than any other judge in the district. If Doyle was hoping for a sympathetic ear, she'd be disappointed. "Be seated," Morrison said, settling into her chair and surveying the packed courtroom. Her eyes found Marcus in the back and held there for a moment, a flash of something, anger, sympathy, determination crossing her face before she looked away. "The court calls the matter of United States of America versus Karen Elizabeth Doyle," the clerk announced. Karen Doyle entered from the side door, flanked by 2 federal marshals. She'd been allowed to change out of her police uniform into civilian clothes, a conservative blue blazer and slacks, but she couldn't hide the defeat in her posture. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, and she kept her eyes on the floor as she approached the defense table. Beside her stood Martin Graves, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. Someone had called in a favor to get him here this quickly. Graves was 60, silver-haired and expensive. He leaned over to whisper something to Doyle, who nodded mechanically. At the prosecution table stood Assistant U.S. Attorney James Reeves, 45, black, and known for his methodical prosecution of civil rights cases. He'd put away corrupt cops in 3 different counties. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, radiating quiet confidence. "Ms. Doyle," Judge Morrison began, "you've been charged with multiple federal offenses. How do you plead?" Before Graves could speak, Doyle stepped forward. "Your Honor, I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing my job. That man," she pointed directly at Marcus, "was acting suspiciously, refused to identify himself, and became violent when I attempted to question him. Everything I did was justified under the circumstances." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Graves grabbed Doyle's arm, trying to pull her back, but she shook him off. "I've served this community for 14 years. Her voice rose, taking on a desperate edge. I've kept people safe, and now I'm being railroaded because I had the misfortune of not recognizing some judge who thinks he's above the law. Ms. Doyle, that's enough, Morrison said sharply. Mr. Graves, control your client. Your Honor, my client is understandably emotional, Graves said smoothly. We request a brief recess to— I don't need a recess, Doyle interrupted. I need someone to listen to the truth. He assaulted me. I have witnesses. My officers saw everything. Your officers have already given statements contradicting your account, Reeves said calmly. Officers Rodriguez and Davis both testified that you initiated physical contact with Judge Langston without provocation. They're lying, Doyle shrieked. They turned on me. After everything I did for them, they stabbed me in the back. Or, Reeves continued, they told the truth after being placed under oath and reminded that perjury carries a federal prison sentence. Graves tried again. Your Honor, my client clearly needs time to compose herself. We move for a continuance. Denied, Morrison said. Ms. Doyle, you will sit down and be quiet or I will have you gagged. Is that understood? Doyle stared at her in disbelief. You can't do that. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, Morrison said coldly. I suggest you exercise it. Mr. Graves, enter your client's plea. Graves looked at Doyle, who was breathing hard, her face flushed. Not guilty, Your Honor. So entered. Now regarding bail. The government requests remand, Your Honor. Reeves interrupted. The defendant is a flight risk and poses a danger to the community. That's ridiculous, Graves protested. My client is a decorated police chief with deep roots in this community. She's not going anywhere. Your client used her position as police chief to assault a federal judge and then filed false reports to cover it up, Reeves countered. She's also made statements suggesting she doesn't believe she's done anything wrong, which indicates she may continue to abuse her authority if released. I want to say something, Doyle demanded, standing again despite Graves's attempts to restrain her. Your Honor, please. Let me tell my side. Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Ms. Doyle, anything you say right now can and will be used against you at trial. Are you sure you want to speak? I'm sure, Doyle said, because I'm innocent and I can prove it. Graves looked like he wanted to die. Your Honor, I strongly advise my client not to. Let her speak, Reeves said quietly. Please. Morrison raised an eyebrow but nodded. Very well. Ms. Doyle, you have 5 minutes. Doyle straightened, seeming to gather confidence from finally being allowed to speak. Thank you, Your Honor. This morning, at approximately 8:45 a.m., I received an anonymous tip about a suspicious individual planning to disrupt courthouse operations. I responded with 2 officers to investigate. Marcus leaned forward slightly, listening. This was the fabricated narrative she'd mentioned at the jail fully formed now. When we arrived, we observed a black male in his 50s approaching the courthouse. Doyle continued. He was carrying a briefcase and appeared nervous. When I approached to question him, he became immediately hostile and confrontational. That's not what the video shows, Reeves interjected. The video doesn't show everything, Doyle insisted. It doesn't show his body language, the way he positioned himself aggressively, the subtle threats in his tone. Subtle threats, Morrison repeated. Such as? He kept quoting the Constitution at me, talking about his rights like he was some kind of sovereign citizen preparing to cause trouble. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Even Morrison's lips twitched. Ms. Doyle, the judge said carefully, are you seriously suggesting that citing constitutional rights is evidence of criminal intent? I'm saying it was a pattern of behavior consistent with individuals who plan to disrupt legal proceedings, Doyle said stubbornly. He refused to identify himself. Because he wasn't legally required to, Reeves said. He made threatening movements toward his briefcase. He set it down on the steps, as the video clearly shows. He grabbed my arm when I attempted to detain him. The video shows you grabbing his arm, Morrison said, not the other way around. The angle is deceptive. Doyle was sweating now, her carefully constructed story crumbling under scrutiny. From where I stood, I could see his aggressive intent. I had to act to protect myself and the courthouse. By slapping him across the face. Morrison's voice was ice. I used necessary force to subdue a violent suspect. He wasn't violent, he was standing still. He was about to become violent, I could see it. I've been doing this for 14 years. I know when someone is dangerous. You saw a black man in a suit and assumed he was dangerous, Marcus said quietly from the back of the courtroom. Every head turned toward him. Morrison frowned, but didn't silence him. Doyle's face twisted. That's not true. This had nothing to do with race. Then what did it have to do with? Marcus asked, standing slowly. My expensive suit that you assumed was purchased with drug money. My Mercedes that you called a drug dealer car. My refusal to be intimidated by your illegal demands. Tell me, Chief Doyle, what exactly about me seems suspicious, other than the color of my skin? You were acting suspicious, Doyle insisted. You had an attitude. An attitude, Marcus repeated. I was calm, professional, and respectful. I asked if I was being detained, which is a constitutional right. I questioned your legal authority to stop me, which is my civic duty. And when you couldn't provide justification for your actions, you escalated to violence. I did my job. Your job is to serve and protect, not to assault citizens based on racial prejudice. I'm not prejudiced. Doyle's voice cracked. I've worked with black officers. I have black friends. And yet when you saw me, you didn't see a person. You didn't see a professional. You saw a threat that needed to be controlled. Because you were acting like a criminal. How does a criminal act, Chief Doyle? What specifically about my behavior suggested criminality? Use your words carefully, because this courtroom is full of witnesses, and your answer will be part of the permanent record. Doyle opened her mouth, then closed it. The trap was obvious now, even to her. Any description she gave would reveal the racial profiling at the heart of her actions. She started, then stopped. I made a judgment call. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. But I acted in good faith. Good faith, Marcus said softly. Is that what you call it when you fabricate evidence? When you file false reports? When you convince your officers to lie under oath to protect you? I didn't fabricate anything. My report was accurate based on what I observed. Your report says I punched you in the stomach, did I? You attempted to. Did my fist make contact with your body? It would have if I hadn't defended myself. So no, I didn't punch you. Your report is a lie. It's not a lie. It's what would have happened. Your report says I tried to grab your weapon. Did I? You reached toward it. Did my hand touch your weapon? No, but. So that's another lie. Your report says I made threatening statements. What specifically did I say that was threatening? You talked about laws and rights and that's threatening. Knowledge of constitutional law is a threat. The way you said it was threatening. Chief Doyle, Judge Morrison interrupted, I've reviewed the body camera footage. Judge Langston's tone was calm and measured throughout the entire encounter. There was nothing threatening about it. You don't understand, Doyle said desperately. You weren't there. You didn't feel what I felt when he what? Marcus pressed. When he dared to question your authority. When he refused to be intimidated. When he stood there in his tailored suit and his perfect diction, and reminded you that the badge on your chest doesn't make you exempt from the Constitution? He made me feel unsafe. Doyle's voice rose to a shout. The courtroom went silent. Even Graves looked shocked. He made you feel unsafe, Marcus repeated slowly. A man in a suit carrying a briefcase asking legal questions. That made you feel unsafe. Yes. Why? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Doyle's mouth worked soundlessly. She looked around the courtroom as if seeking help, but found only stares ranging from contempt to pity. Because, she finally whispered, because people like you think you're better than us. People like me, Marcus said. Black people. That's what you mean, isn't it? No, I mean educated people, rich people. People who look down on cops and treat us like we're stupid. I didn't treat you like you were stupid, Chief. I treated you like you were violating my rights, which you were. The only person in this courtroom who thinks less of you because you're a police officer is you. Doyle collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands. Graves put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off. Ms. Doyle, Morrison said, her voice softer now. Do you understand that what you just described, stopping someone because they made you feel unsafe, without any objective basis for that feeling, is the definition of discriminatory policing? I didn't discriminate, Doyle mumbled. Then why didn't you stop the white lawyer who walked past you 3 minutes before Judge Langston arrived? Morrison consulted her notes. According to the security footage, a white male in his 30s, also carrying a briefcase, also wearing a suit, walked right past your position at 8:44 a.m. You didn't stop him. You didn't question him. Why not? Doyle had no answer. I'll tell you why, Morrison continued. Because when you saw him, you assumed he belonged. And when you saw Judge Langston, you assumed he didn't. That assumption, Ms. Doyle, is what we call implicit bias. And when you act on it while wearing a badge, it becomes a federal civil rights violation. I want to change my plea, Doyle said suddenly. Graves grabbed her arm. Karen, don't. I want to plead guilty, she said louder now. I'll take whatever punishment they want. I'll resign. I'll cooperate with the investigation. Just make this stop. Ms. Doyle, you don't know what you're saying, Graves hissed. We can fight this. I can't fight the truth, Doyle said, and something in her voice had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by exhaustion and defeat. I did what they said I did. I saw a black man and I assumed the worst. I grabbed him, I hit him, I arrested him, and then I lied about all of it because I couldn't admit I was wrong. The courtroom was silent enough to hear breathing. I've been lying for so long I forgot what the truth feels like. Doyle continued, talking more to herself now than to anyone else. Every time someone complained about my department, I dismissed it. Every time an officer questioned my methods, I silenced them. Every time I saw someone who didn't look like they belonged. Her voice broke. I made sure they knew it. Ms. Doyle, as your attorney, I'm advising you to stop talking immediately, Graves said urgently. But Doyle kept going, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. Judge Langston was right. This isn't about one bad day. This is about 14 years of abuse. 14 years of making people feel small because it made me feel big. 14 years of hiding behind a badge instead of living up to it. She looked up at Morrison with red-rimmed eyes. I'm guilty, Your Honor, of everything they said and probably more. I'm guilty, and I'm sorry, and I know that doesn't fix anything, but it's all I have left. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Mr. Graves, does your client understand the implications of what she's saying? I don't think she does, Your Honor. I request a psychiatric evaluation. I'm not crazy, Doyle said flatly. I'm just finally being honest. Your Honor. Reeves stood. The government is willing to accept a guilty plea if Ms. Doyle is willing to cooperate fully with our investigation into systemic issues within her department. How fully? Morrison asked. Complete disclosure of all questionable arrests, all use of force incidents, all complaints that were dismissed without proper investigation. We want to know how deep this goes. Doyle nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything. I'll give you names, dates, case numbers. Everything. Marcus watched from the back of the courtroom, feeling something he hadn't expected: sadness. Not for Doyle specifically, but for what she represented. How many Karen Doyles were out there right now, in how many police departments convinced their prejudices were justified as long as they wore a badge? Very well. Morrison said. The court accepts the defendant's change of plea to guilty on all counts. Sentencing is scheduled for 60 days from today, pending the completion of a full investigation into the defendant's conduct and cooperation. Ms. Doyle, you are remanded to federal custody pending sentencing. Bail is denied. The gavel fell with a sound like a gunshot. Marshals surrounded Doyle, preparing to lead her away. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time she sounded like she meant it. "I'm so sorry." Marcus nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness that would take time if it came at all. But it was acknowledgement. She'd finally told the truth, and that was a start. As they led her out, Marcus remained seated, watching the courtroom empty. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Lawyers clustered in corners, whispering about the implications. And Judge Morrison sat alone at the bench, looking tired and older than her 63 years. Finally, she noticed Marcus still sitting there. "Judge Langston, do you have a moment?" He approached the bench and she gestured for him to come around to her side. When he did, she stood and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "I'm so sorry that happened to you," she said quietly. "In our courthouse, on our watch. It wasn't your fault, Elizabeth. Wasn't it?" She pulled back, her eyes wet. "We've all heard rumors about Doyle for years, complaints from defendants, whispers from defense attorneys. But we didn't push. We didn't investigate. We trusted the system to police itself." "The system did fail," Marcus agreed. "But today it worked. That's what matters." "Does it?" Morrison asked. "How many people did she do this to who didn't have your resources, your knowledge, your credibility?" "That's exactly why we can't let this be the end," Marcus said. "Her confession is the beginning, not the conclusion. We use this to audit every case she touched, every arrest her department made. We find the others, and we make it right." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's going to take years." "Then we'd better get started." Marcus left the courthouse 2 hours later after giving his full statement to the FBI and sitting for interviews with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The sun was setting as he walked to his car, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his daughter Michelle calling from Chicago. "Dad?" Her voice was tight with worry. "Dad, I saw the videos. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, sliding into the driver's seat but not starting the car. "Just a long day." "A cop hit you, Dad. That's not fine." "That's—" Her voice broke. "I can't believe someone did that to you." "I know." He closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. "But it's over now." "Is it?" Michelle asked. "Or is this just the beginning?" Marcus looked back at the courthouse, the building where he'd spent 8 years of his life pursuing justice for others, never imagining he'd need to pursue it for himself. "It's both," he said finally. "An ending and a beginning. Justice works that way sometimes." They talked for a few more minutes before Marcus promised to call her tomorrow with more details. After they hung up, he sat in the parking lot as darkness fell, thinking about Karen Doyle's confession, about the system that had enabled her, about all the people who'd suffered because no one had stopped her sooner. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, he just needed to rest. He started the car and drove home, the courthouse growing smaller in his rearview mirror, but never quite disappearing. Because some things once seen can never be unseen, and some truths once spoken can never be unheard. The reckoning had only just begun. Marcus slept poorly that night, his mind replaying the day's events in an endless loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt Doyle's hand striking his face, heard the crack of skin on skin, tasted the copper of his own blood. He woke at 4 in the morning and gave up on sleep, making coffee in the kitchen of the home he'd shared with Sarah before cancer took her 3 years ago. Her presence still lingered in the collection of cookbooks on the shelf, the herb garden visible through the window in the first light of dawn, the way the house settled and creaked in familiar patterns. He wished she were here. Sarah had always known what to say when the world felt heavy, had always reminded him that justice was a marathon, not a sprint. She'd been a public defender, had fought for the very people that cops like Doyle steamrolled on their way to conviction records and promotion. She would have been furious about what happened, but she also would have known how to channel that fury into something productive. By 6 a.m., Marcus was showered, dressed in a fresh suit, and reviewing the case files that Sarah Chen had compiled the previous evening. The FBI's preliminary investigation into Doyle's department had already uncovered troubling patterns. In the past 5 years alone, there had been 47 excessive force complaints against officers under her command. Of those, 46 had been dismissed after internal investigation. The one that wasn't had resulted in a quiet settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Special Agent Reeves. "Need to meet before the sentencing. Big developments. My office 7 a.m. He arrived at the federal building at 6:55. Reeves was already there, looking like he hadn't slept much either. Spread across the conference table were dozens of case files, photographs, and what appeared to be internal police department memos. "Judge Langston," Reeves said, gesturing to the evidence. "You need to see this before we go into court today." Marcus approached the table, his eyes scanning the documents. What he saw made his stomach turn. "These are arrest records going back 12 years, Reeves explained. "After Doyle's confession yesterday, we got a warrant to audit her entire department. We've been up all night, and what we found..." He shook his head. "It's worse than we thought." One file caught Marcus's eye. Deshaun Miller arrested 4 years ago for assault on an officer. The arrest report described a violent confrontation outside a convenience store, with Miller allegedly attacking Officer Jennifer Davis without provocation. He'd pled guilty to avoid trial, served 18 months. "Look at the body camera footage from that arrest," Reeves said, pulling up a laptop. Marcus watched as the video played. Deshaun Miller, a young black man, maybe 22 years old, standing outside a store with his hands in his pockets. Davis approaches, demands ID. Miller asks why. Davis grabs him. Miller pulls away, not violently, just reflexively. And then Davis is on him, forcing him to the ground, while Doyle appears from off-camera shouting, "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Even though Miller isn't resisting, he's just trying to protect his head from the pavement. "The arrest report said he threw the first punch," Marcus said quietly. "He never touched her," Reeves confirmed. But without the video, which mysteriously wasn't included in discovery, his public defender advised him to take the plea, 18 months, for a crime that never happened. "How many more like this?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would devastate him. So far, 37 cases where the body camera footage directly contradicts the arrest report. And those are just the ones where the footage still exists. Doyle implemented a policy 2 years ago where footage was automatically deleted after 90 days unless specifically flagged for retention. "Let me guess," Marcus said. "She controlled what got flagged." "Exactly. Any footage that showed her officers in a bad light gone. Any footage that supported the official narrative preserved and used at trial." Marcus sat down heavily, his mind racing through the implications. 37 people at minimum convicted based on fabricated evidence. 37 lives disrupted, damaged, potentially destroyed. Jobs lost, families, broken records that would follow them forever. "We need to notify the defense attorneys," Marcus said. "Every single case needs to be reviewed for Brady violations. The convictions may need to be vacated." "Already started," Reeves said. "But Judge, there's something else. Something that's going to make today's sentencing hearing a lot more complicated." He pulled out another file, this one marked with red tabs. 3 people who were convicted based on Doyle's testimony are currently serving life sentences. One of them, Malcolm Torres, has been writing letters to the federal court for 6 years, claiming he was framed. Every letter went unanswered because he's a convicted cop killer and who believes a cop killer. Marcus opened the file, reading Torres's neat, careful handwriting. The letters were articulate, detailed, and desperately insistent on his innocence. They described an arrest eerily similar to what had happened to Marcus, a traffic stop that escalated for no reason. Doyle claiming Torres had reached for his waistband, other officers backing her story a gun that Torres swore wasn't his. "Please tell me you found evidence," Marcus said. "We found the body camera footage," Reeves said quietly. "It was in a box in Doyle's personal storage locker. She kept it Judge, like a trophy, and it shows everything Torres claimed. The gun was planted. She put it in his car herself while Rodriguez distracted him. The coffee Marcus had drunk earlier threatened to come back up. Rodriguez knew. According to his statement last night, he suspected but couldn't prove it. He was a rookie scared of Doyle, scared of losing his job. So he stayed quiet while a man went to prison for life. Rodriguez is being charged too. Accessory after the fact, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Davis is facing similar charges for her role in multiple incidents. But the bulk of the criminal exposure is Doyle's. She orchestrated everything." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city as it woke to a new day. Somewhere out there, Malcolm Torres sat in a prison cell, 6 years into a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. Somewhere, Deshaun Miller carried a felony conviction that would haunt every job application, every background check, every interaction with the system that was supposed to protect him. "Today's sentencing hearing," Marcus said slowly, "is going to be about more than just what happened to me." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Reeves said. "Judge Morrison wants to know if you'd be willing to preside." Marcus turned sharply. "What?" "Technically, you're the victim in the primary case, so there's a conflict. But Morrison argues that you're also the most qualified person to understand the full scope of what Doyle did. The civil rights violations, the systemic abuse, the lives destroyed. She thinks you should be the one to hand down the sentence. That's highly irregular." "So is a police chief assaulting a federal judge," Reeves pointed out. "Morrison is willing to argue that your unique perspective, both as victim and as someone who understands the law, makes you the ideal person to ensure true justice is served." Marcus considered. Every judicial instinct told him to recuse himself, to let another judge handle the sentencing without the appearance of personal vendetta. But another part of him, the part that had felt the sting of Doyle's hand and the weight of unjust handcuffs, knew that this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. "I'll do it," he said, "but I want every victim there. Every person who was falsely arrested, falsely convicted, who had their rights violated by Doyle's department. They deserve to see this." "We're working on notifications now," Reeves said. "Some of them are still incarcerated. We're arranging transport." "And Torres?" "He'll be there, along with his mother, who's been fighting for his release since the day he was convicted." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on his shoulders like a judge's robe. "What time is the hearing?" 10 a.m., Morrison's courtroom. She's expecting it to take most of the day." "Then I'd better prepare," Marcus said. "Because this isn't just a sentencing, it's a reckoning." The courtroom was packed by 9:30. Marcus arrived early, entering through the judge's private entrance to avoid the media circus in the hallway. Sarah Chen met him in chambers with his robe freshly pressed and a thick binder containing victim impact statements. "There are 53 people who've submitted statements," Sarah said quietly. "And those are just the ones we could locate and notify in time. The FBI thinks there may be hundreds more." Marcus opened the binder, scanning the first few pages. A woman whose son was beaten during a traffic stop. A man who lost his job after a false arrest. A teenager who'd been stopped 17 times in 2 years, always released without charge, always left feeling violated and afraid. Story after story of lives touched by Doyle's corruption, each one a small tragedy that together formed a portrait of systemic injustice. "Are the defendants here?" Marcus asked. "Doyle, Rodriguez, and Davis are in holding. Their attorneys are in the gallery. Judge Morrison is in her chambers. She wanted to speak with you before we begin." Marcus found Morrison reviewing her own notes, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when he entered. "Marcus, are you absolutely sure about this?" she asked. "I can still preside if you think it's too much." "I'm sure," Marcus said. "These people need to see that the system can work, that justice isn't just a word we throw around in opinions and sentencing memoranda. They need to see accountability." Morrison nodded slowly. "Just remember, you're not just speaking to the defendants. You're speaking to everyone who's lost faith in the system. Every person who's been told their word doesn't matter as much as a police officer's. Every community that's been over-policed and underprotected. The weight of that responsibility is enormous." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "That's why it has to be me." At precisely 10 o'clock, Marcus entered the courtroom in his judicial robes. The bailiff called everyone to rise, and Marcus took his seat at the bench, looking out over a sea of faces. The gallery was full of people he'd never seen before: victims, family members, activists, reporters, and citizens who'd followed the case from the viral video to this moment. In the front row sat an elderly black woman with gray hair and a church hat, her hands clutched around a worn Bible. Marcus recognized her from the case file photo, Gloria Torres, Malcolm's mother. Beside her sat a young man with scars on his face that the medical report said came from Police Baton's Deshaun Miller. There were dozens more, each with their own story of pain and injustice. And in the defendants' chairs sat Karen Doyle, Miguel Rodriguez, and Jennifer Davis, all in prison jumpsuits, their hands cuffed in front of them. Doyle looked smaller, somehow, diminished without her uniform and badge. Rodriguez stared at his lap, his face blank with resignation. Davis's eyes were red from crying. "This court is now in session," Marcus began, his voice carrying through the silent room. "We are here for the sentencing of defendants, Karen Elizabeth Doyle, Miguel Rodriguez, and Jennifer Davis, who have entered guilty pleas to multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, assault under color of law, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and filing false reports." He paused, letting the weight of the charges settle over the room. "Before we proceed to sentencing, I want to address something that's been troubling me since this case began. Many of you in this courtroom have asked why I chose to preside over this sentencing despite being a victim myself. The answer is simple: because I can." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "I have resources, education credentials, and a platform that allowed me to fight back when my rights were violated. But most people don't have those advantages. Most people who are assaulted by police, falsely arrested, or subjected to fabricated charges don't have the ability to demand accountability. Their complaints are dismissed. Their stories are doubted. Their trauma is ignored." Marcus looked directly at Gloria Torres, who met his gaze with eyes that held decades of fighting for her son. "I'm presiding today, not in spite of being a victim, but because of it. Because I understand in a way I never did before what it feels like when the system fails you. And I want everyone in this room, especially the defendants, to understand that what happened to me isn't special. It's just the first time someone with my particular privilege couldn't be silenced." He opened the case file, the pages crisp and official. "The presentence report recommends 40 years for Chief Doyle, 15 years for Officer Rodriguez, and 12 years for Officer Davis. These recommendations are based on federal sentencing guidelines for the crimes to which they've pled guilty. But I've reviewed additional evidence that has come to light in the investigation following their arrests, and I believe we need to address the full scope of their criminal conduct before determining appropriate sentences." Marcus nodded to the bailiff, who wheeled in a cart stacked with case files and evidence boxes. "Over the past 72 hours, federal investigators have uncovered evidence of systemic corruption within the Millbrook County Police Department. Body camera footage that was deliberately suppressed, arrest reports that were falsified, evidence that was planted, testimony that was perjured, and lives that were destroyed." He picked up one file from the stack. "Malcolm Torres, convicted of attempted murder of a police officer and sentenced to life without parole 6 years ago. Chief Doyle testified that Mr. Torres reached for his waistband during a traffic stop, that she feared for her life, that a loaded weapon was found in his vehicle. Mr. Torres maintained his innocence, claimed the gun was planted, and filed multiple appeals that were denied. Marcus looked at Doyle, who had gone pale. 3 days ago, federal agents discovered body camera footage in Chief Doyle's personal storage locker. Footage that should have been turned over to the defense, but wasn't. Would the court officer please play Exhibit 47? The lights dimmed, and a screen descended from the ceiling. The video began playing the same footage Reeves had shown Marcus that morning. The courtroom watched in horrified silence as Doyle approached Torres's car, reached into her pocket, and slipped something under the passenger seat, while Rodriguez kept Torres distracted on the driver's side. When the lights came back up, Gloria Torres was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. In the defendant's chair, Doyle had her head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. That footage, Marcus said, his voice hard, shows Chief Doyle planting the weapon that sent Malcolm Torres to prison for life. A weapon he never possessed, a crime he never committed, 6 years stolen from a man who was guilty of nothing more than being black in Millbrook County. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Marcus let it continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence. Mr. Torres's conviction has been vacated as of this morning. He will be released from state custody within the hour. But no amount of legal remediation can give him back the time he lost. The birthdays, the holidays, the simple freedom of walking down a street without shackles. Chief Doyle, you didn't just break the law. You destroyed a life. Doyle's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client has expressed deep remorse. Remorse doesn't resurrect the dead or restore lost years. Marcus cut him off. Sit down, counselor. I'm not finished. He picked up another file. Deshaun Miller, arrested 4 years ago for assault on Officer Davis. The arrest report claimed he initiated a physical altercation without provocation. He was advised to plead guilty to avoid trial, which he did, serving 18 months in county jail. The body camera footage tells a different story. Another video played. The courtroom watched Deshaun Miller do nothing more threatening than ask why he was being detained before Davis grabbed him and forced him to the ground. Mr. Miller lost his job, his apartment, and custody of his daughter because of that conviction, Marcus said. A conviction based entirely on a lie told by Officer Davis and supported by Chief Doyle's department. Mr. Miller, would you like to address the court? Deshaun. Miller stood slowly, his hands shaking. He was thin, too thin, and the scars on his face caught the light as he turned toward the bench. I don't have fancy words like you, Judge, he said quietly. I just want to say that when they arrested me, when they lied about what happened, they didn't just take 18 months. They took my daughter. She was 4 years old when I went in. When I got out, she didn't remember me. Her foster family adopted her. I see her once a month, supervised visits, and she calls another man daddy. His voice broke, and he sat down abruptly, covering his face with his hands. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Marcus looked at Davis, who was crying openly now. Officer Davis, do you understand what you did? Davis nodded, unable to speak. I need to hear you say it. I destroyed his family, Davis whispered. I lied, and I destroyed his family, and I can't take it back. No, you can't, Marcus agreed. Just like you can't take back the lies you told in 36 other cases we've uncovered so far. 36 people convicted on false testimony. 36 lives disrupted. 36 families torn apart. He turned to Rodriguez. Officer Rodriguez, you weren't directly involved in as many incidents as Chief Doyle or Officer Davis, but you were there. You saw. You knew. And you said nothing. Rodriguez looked up for the first time, his face haggard. I know, Your Honor. I was a coward. I told myself I was just following orders, that I couldn't make a difference, that speaking up would end my career. I told myself a lot of things to avoid admitting the truth, that I was complicit in everything they did. Why are you speaking up now? Marcus asked. Because I finally understood that losing my career is nothing compared to what happened to these people, Rodriguez said. When I saw what Chief Doyle did to you when I watched her lie about it, I realized that if I stayed silent this time, I'd be just as guilty as she was. And I couldn't. I couldn't live with that anymore. Marcus nodded slowly. Officer Rodriguez, your cooperation with federal investigators has been noted. You've provided testimony and evidence that has helped us identify dozens of wrongful convictions. That cooperation will be reflected in your sentence. But it doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't absolve you of the harm you enabled. I know, Your Honor. I don't expect absolution. I just want to try to make things right. Making things right, Marcus repeated. Chief Doyle, is that what you want to do? Make things right. Doyle raised her head slowly. Her face was blotchy from crying, her eyes hollow with defeat. I don't think I can make anything right, Your Honor. I've destroyed too much. Hurt too many people. I told myself I was keeping people safe, maintaining order, protecting the community. But the truth is, I was protecting my own ego, my own power, and I used people's lives as stepping stones to my own career advancement. Why? Marcus asked simply. Because I could, Doyle said, her voice barely audible. Because the system let me. Because nobody challenged me. Because I wore a badge, and that badge meant people believed me over everyone else no matter what I did. Did you know what you were doing was wrong? Yes. The word was immediate, honest. Yes, I knew. But I convinced myself it didn't matter, because the people I was hurting were criminals anyway. Or I told myself they would have been criminals eventually, so it was preventive justice. I had 100 rationalizations for every abuse of power, and they all led to the same place, me believing I was above the law I swore to uphold. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. You understand that what you've just said constitutes an admission of conscious, willful violation of constitutional rights. That you're not claiming ignorance or good intentions, but actual knowledge of wrongdoing. Yes, Your Honor, I'm done lying. I'm done making excuses. I did terrible things to innocent people, and I need to be held accountable. Finally, Marcus said quietly, something we agree on. He opened the sentencing guidelines, though he already knew what they said. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Chief Doyle, Marcus began. You have pled guilty to assault on a federal judge, a crime that carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. You have also pled guilty to civil rights violations under color of law that resulted in bodily injury, which carries a maximum sentence of 10 years per count. You have pled guilty to conspiracy to obstruct justice, which carries a maximum of 20 years. And you have pled guilty to multiple counts of filing false reports, each carrying a maximum of 5 years. He paused, doing the mental calculation that everyone in the courtroom was already doing. In total, you face a maximum combined sentence of over 100 years in federal prison. The sentencing guidelines recommend 40 years. But those guidelines were calculated before we discovered the full extent of your criminal conduct. Before we found the planted evidence, the suppressed footage, the systematic destruction of people's lives. Doyle sat motionless, accepting her fate. I have reviewed the victim impact statements from 53 individuals whose lives you damaged. I have considered your cooperation with investigators and your apparent remorse. I have weighed the need for punishment against the possibility of rehabilitation. And I have asked myself, what sentence would serve justice, not just for me, but for every person in this courtroom who suffered under your authority? Marcus looked out at the gallery, at Gloria Torres, clutching her Bible, at Deshaun Miller, with his scarred face, at the dozens of others who'd come to witness this moment. For the assault on a federal judge and related charges stemming from the incident involving me personally, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. For the civil rights violations involving Malcolm Torres, including planting evidence and perjury that resulted in a wrongful conviction, I sentence you to 20 years to run consecutively. For the 36 other cases of falsified reports and civil rights violations, I sentence you to an additional 5 years, also consecutive. The math was simple and brutal. 40 years total. You will serve this sentence in federal prison without possibility of parole. Upon release, you will be subject to 10 years of supervised probation, during which you are prohibited from working in law enforcement or any position of public authority. You will also be required to participate in restorative justice programs with victims who choose to engage with you. Marcus set down the sentencing order and looked directly at Doyle. I want to be clear about something, Chief Doyle. This sentence isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. You had power, and you abused it systematically for 14 years. You destroyed lives because you could. You lied because it was easy. And you counted on a system that values the word of police officers above the word of the communities they're supposed to serve. His voice hardened. That system failed. And you exploited that failure at every opportunity. 40 years in prison won't undo the harm you caused, but it will send a message to every other officer who thinks the badge makes them untouchable. It won't. Not anymore. The gavel fell with a sound like thunder. Doyle closed her eyes, accepting the sentence without protest. The marshals moved to lead her away, but Marcus held up his hand. One more thing, Chief Doyle. Malcolm Torres is being released today. His record will be expunged, his conviction erased. The same will happen for Deshaun Miller and every other person you falsely convicted. Their names will be cleared. Their lives will be given a chance to restart. That's more than you gave them, and more than you deserve to know about. But I want you to carry that knowledge into prison with you. Every day for the next 40 years, I want you to remember that justice eventually prevailed despite everything you did to prevent it. Now the marshals led her away, and Doyle went without resistance. Her head bowed, her career and freedom both irretrievably lost. Marcus turned to Rodriguez and Davis. Their sentences were shorter, 12 years for Rodriguez, 10 for Davis, but still substantial enough to reflect the gravity of their crimes. They too accepted their sentences without protest, seeming almost relieved that the weight of their guilt finally had a concrete endpoint. When the last defendant had been led from the courtroom, Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Then he looked out at the gallery at the faces of people who'd been failed by the system and were now watching it finally work. This court wants to acknowledge the courage of everyone who came forward to tell their stories, he said quietly. Your voices mattered. Your pain was real. And your willingness to trust the system one more time, despite every reason not to made today possible. Thank you. Gloria Torres stood, her church hat slightly askew, tears streaming down her face. Judge Langston, may I speak? Of course, Mrs. Torres. My boy is coming home today, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. After 6 years of praying, fighting, begging anyone who would listen to look at his case. My boy is coming home. I don't have words for what that means. I don't have words for what you've done. But I want you to know, her voice broke, I want you to know that you gave me back my son. And I will pray for you every day, for the rest of my life. Marcus felt his own eyes sting with tears. Your son gave himself back, Mrs. Torres. He never stopped fighting for the truth. He never gave up hope. That strength came from him and from you raising him to believe that justice mattered even when it seemed impossible. One by one, others stood to speak. Deshaun Miller thanked the court for giving him a chance to fight for custody of his daughter. A woman whose brother had been beaten during a traffic stop thanked Marcus for believing victims over badge numbers. A teenager stopped 17 times in 2 years thanked him for making it possible to walk down the street without fear. Each testimony added another layer of meaning to the day's events, transforming the sentencing from a legal proceeding into something deeper. A communal acknowledgement of pain, accountability, and the difficult work of rebuilding trust. When the last person had spoken, Marcus removed his robe, slowly feeling exhausted, but also lighter somehow. The reckoning he'd promised had come to pass. Justice had been served not perfectly, never perfectly, but as fully as the law allowed. Sarah Chen met him in chambers with a small smile. That was extraordinary, Judge. It was necessary, Marcus corrected, hanging up the robe. How many cases are still under review? The FBI thinks there may be as many as 200 that need examination. It's going to take months, maybe years. Then we'd better get started, Marcus said. He looked at his reflection in the chamber window, seeing the faint bruise still visible on his cheek where Doyle had struck him. It would fade in a few days, leaving no permanent mark. But the mark this case left on the legal system, on police accountability, on civil rights enforcement, on the willingness of victims to come forward, that would last far longer. Justice, Marcus thought, wasn't a destination. It was a direction. And today, finally, they'd taken a step in the right one. The weeks following the sentencing moved with the strange dual rhythm of legal proceedings, simultaneously glacial and breakneck. Marcus returned to his regular docket presiding over civil rights cases with a newfound intensity that his law clerk Sarah noticed immediately. Every motion to dismiss every qualified immunity defense. Every argument that a police officer's word should automatically outweigh a citizen's complaint received scrutiny that bordered on surgical. "You're different," Sarah observed one afternoon as they reviewed briefs in his chambers. "Not in a bad way. Just sharper, somehow." Marcus looked up from the motion he'd been annotating. "I understand the stakes now in a way I didn't before. These aren't just abstract legal questions anymore. They're people's lives." Outside his window, Millbrook County was changing too. The viral video of his assault had sparked protests, town halls, and a complete reorganization of the police department. The interim chief, a black woman named Angela Martinez, brought in from the state police, had spent her first week firing 17 officers who'd accumulated excessive force complaints. Her second week was devoted to implementing new training protocols. By the third week, she'd installed tamper-proof body cameras on every officer with automatic upload to a secure server that neither she nor anyone else in the department could access without a court order. "The cameras should have always been like this," Martinez told reporters at a press conference Marcus watched from his chambers. "When the people responsible for oversight are the same people being recorded, there's an inherent conflict of interest. This new system removes that conflict. Every interaction is preserved, every piece of footage is available for review, and no one can make evidence disappear to protect themselves or their colleagues." The reporter followed up. "Chief Martinez, some officers are complaining that this creates a presumption of guilt, that you don't trust them to do their jobs." Martinez's response was swift and uncompromising. "Trust is earned, not assumed. The previous administration violated the public's trust systematically for over a decade. We earned that trust back by being transparent, accountable, and willing to submit to the same scrutiny we apply to the community we serve. Any officer uncomfortable with that level of accountability should consider whether they're in the right profession." The clip went viral almost as fast as the original video of Marcus's assault. Martinez became a symbol of reform, her face appearing on magazine covers and cable news panels. But she deflected credit at every opportunity, always bringing the conversation back to the victims Doyle had harmed and the systemic changes needed to prevent future abuse. Marcus met with her in his chambers 6 weeks after the sentencing. She arrived promptly at 8 a.m., dressed in her crisp uniform, her bearing suggesting military background, even though her file said she'd been civilian law enforcement her entire career. "Judge Langston," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing me." "Chief Martinez, please sit. Coffee." "Black, thank you." She settled into the chair across from his desk, accepting the mug with a nod of appreciation. "I wanted to update you personally on our progress with the case reviews. We've examined 143 arrests made under Chief Doyle's command. Of those, we found evidence of misconduct in 87. Marcus set down his own coffee carefully. 87. 87 cases where reports were falsified, evidence was planted or suppressed, or testimony was perjured. The U.S. Attorney's Office is moving to vacate all 87 convictions. Some of those people are still incarcerated. Some finished their sentences years ago and are living with criminal records that destroyed their employment prospects, their housing options, their lives. How are you handling notification? We're working with a coalition of defense attorneys and civil rights organizations. Every person affected is being contacted personally, offered free legal representation to clear their records, and connected with resources for employment assistance, housing support, and mental health counseling. Martinez paused, her expression pained. Judge, we owe these people more than we can ever repay. But we're trying. That's all any of us can do, Marcus said quietly. Try. And keep trying until we get it right. There's something else. Martinez pulled a folder from her briefcase. We found a pattern in Doyle's arrests that the FBI is calling statistically impossible to explain without deliberate targeting. Over 90% of the false arrests involved people of color. The stops that escalated to violence happened in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods at rates 5 times higher than in white neighborhoods. And the complaints that were dismissed without investigation came almost exclusively from minority communities. Marcus wasn't surprised, but hearing the statistics stated so baldly still made his chest tighten. Systemic racism isn't a bug in the system. It is the system. Not anymore, Martinez said firmly. Not in my department. I've implemented bias training community oversight boards and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory policing. First complaint with merit and you're done. No second chances, no internal investigations that protect bad officers. You violate someone's civil rights, you lose your badge and face criminal prosecution. That's going to be unpopular with the police union. The police union can adjust to the new reality or find themselves defending officers nobody wants to defend, Martinez said bluntly. I didn't take this job to make friends. I took it to rebuild trust, and that requires holding officers to the highest possible standard. Marcus studied her across the desk, seeing echoes of his own determination reflected back. The community is lucky to have you. The community deserves better than luck, Martinez countered. They deserve competent ethical policing as a baseline expectation, not a pleasant surprise. That's what I'm here to provide. After she left, Marcus sat in his chambers, thinking about systems and change, about how one moment of violence had exposed rot that had been growing for years. His phone buzzed with a reminder about the afternoon's scheduled event, one he'd been simultaneously anticipating and dreading. The County Board of Supervisors had voted unanimously to rename the courthouse. The new name would be unveiled at a ceremony scheduled for 2 p.m., and Marcus had been asked to speak. He'd written and rewritten his remarks a dozen times, never quite capturing what he wanted to say. Sarah poked her head in at 1:30. Judge, the car's here whenever you're ready. Marcus nodded, straightening his tie and reaching for his suit jacket. The bruise on his face had long since faded, but sometimes he could still feel the phantom sting of Doyle's hand, a reminder that existed more in memory than flesh. The courthouse steps were crowded when he arrived. A temporary stage had been erected draped in red, white, and blue bunting. News cameras lined the perimeter, and gathered in the plaza were hundreds of people, courthouse staff, local officials, community members, and scattered throughout the crowd. Faces Marcus recognized from the sentencing hearing. Gloria Torres in her church hat. Deshaun Miller with his daughter on his shoulders, the little girl finally old enough to remember him now. Malcolm Torres himself free for 2 months, and still adjusting to sunlight and open spaces. Mayor Sandra Williams took the podium first, her prepared remarks hitting all the expected notes about tragedy and triumph, healing and hope. She spoke well, but Marcus could see the calculation behind her words. Williams had been mayor during Doyle's entire tenure, had praised her publicly, had never questioned the complaints that reached City Hall. Now she was repositioning herself as a champion of reform, and the crowd received her speech with polite but unenthusiastic applause. Chief Martinez spoke next, her remarks shorter and more pointed. We cannot undo the past, she said, her voice carrying across the plaza. We cannot give back the years stolen or erase the trauma inflicted, but we can ensure it never happens again. That is our commitment to this community, not just words, but action. Not just promises, but accountability. Every single day. The applause for Martinez was genuine, sustained, punctuated with calls of support from the crowd. Then it was Marcus's turn. He approached the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt the weight of the moment settle on him like his judicial robe. 3 months ago, he began. I walked up these steps expecting an ordinary Tuesday. I had cases to hear, motions to review, the routine business of justice that fills a judge's calendar. Instead, I was stopped, questioned, assaulted, and arrested based solely on the color of my skin and one police officer's assumption that I didn't belong here. He paused, letting the words resonate. What happened to me wasn't unique. It wasn't even unusual. The only thing special about my experience was that I had the resources, the knowledge, and the platform to fight back. Hundreds of other people in this county suffered similar injustices without any of those advantages. They were silenced, dismissed, convicted based on lies, and left to carry the burden of a corrupt system that valued a police officer's word above truth itself. Malcolm Torres was nodding in the crowd, his mother's hand tight in his own. Today we're renaming this courthouse. We're putting new words on the building, new letters in brass above the door. But buildings don't deliver justice. Systems don't protect rights. People do. Judges who refuse to accept police testimony uncritically. Prosecutors who investigate complaints thoroughly. Defense attorneys who fight for their clients even when it's difficult. Police officers who report misconduct instead of covering it up. And citizens who demand accountability even when the system tells them their voices don't matter. Marcus's voice grew stronger, carrying across the plaza. The name on this building is changing because we're changing. Not just the courthouse, but the entire system of justice it represents. We're implementing reforms that should have existed from the beginning. Body cameras that can't be tampered with. Civilian oversight with real authority. Automatic review of any arrest that results in injury. And most importantly, a fundamental shift in how we think about policing, not as warriors occupying enemy territory, but as public servants accountable to the communities they protect. Deshaun Miller's daughter waved a small American flag, not understanding the significance of the moment, but sensing its importance. These changes didn't come because people in power suddenly developed consciences, Marcus continued. They came because victims found courage, because witnesses spoke truth, because officers like Miguel Rodriguez finally said enough, despite the personal cost. Change always requires sacrifice from those with the least power to spare. That's not justice, that's reality. But we can work to make sure those sacrifices aren't in vain. He looked at the covered sign above the courthouse entrance, the new name hidden beneath blue fabric. In a moment we'll unveil the new name of this courthouse. Some people have suggested it should be named after me, but I declined that honor. This building doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who walks through those doors seeking justice, regardless of their race, their income, their background, or their ability to hire expensive lawyers. The name should reflect that principle. Mayor Williams stepped forward with a ceremonial cord. Judge Langston, would you do the honors? Marcus pulled the cord and the fabric fell away, revealing brass letters that caught the afternoon sun. The People's Federal Courthouse. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus saw tears on more than one face. Not his name. Not a monument to ego or individual achievement, but a reminder that justice belonged to everyone, that the building existed to serve the people. All the people, without exception or qualification. The People's Federal Courthouse, Marcus said when the applause subsided. Because justice isn't blind, it sees everything. It sees color and ignores it as a basis for judgment. It sees power and refuses to be intimidated by it. It sees lies and exposes them with truth. And it sees pain and responds with accountability, not dismissal. He gripped the podium, the moment feeling larger than words could capture. No one is above the law. Not police chiefs, not judges, not mayors or governors or presidents. We are all equal before the principle of justice, and when that principle is violated, there must be consequences, real consequences. Not internal investigations that protect the guilty, not settlements that silence the victims, but public accountability that says clearly, this was wrong, this harmed people, and this will not be tolerated. Gloria Torres stood, her Bible clutched to her chest, and began to clap. Others joined her until the entire plaza was standing applause, washing over Marcus like a wave. When it finally quieted, Marcus spoke his final words, the ones he'd written and rewritten until they carried exactly the meaning he needed. 3 months ago, I was a victim of the system I serve. Today, I'm a witness to its potential for change. Tomorrow, I'll return to that bench inside this building and continue the work of justice, knowing that every decision I make, every case I hear, every defendant and plaintiff who appears before me deserves the same fairness I demanded when I was the one wearing handcuffs. He stepped back from the podium, and the crowd surged forward, not in chaos, but in communion. People wanted to shake his hand, to share their stories, to thank him for something they believed he'd done, but which Marcus knew was far more complicated. He hadn't saved the system. He'd simply exposed its failures in a way that couldn't be ignored. Gloria Torres reached him first, pulling him into a hug that smelled like lavender and faith. "My boy is working again," she said into his shoulder. "He got a job at the community center helping other young men stay out of trouble. He's rebuilding his life, Judge, because of you." "Because he never gave up," Marcus corrected gently. "Your son's strength saved him. I just helped remove some obstacles." Malcolm Torres himself appeared, towering over his mother, but with the same gentle eyes. "Judge Langston, I wrote you a letter every month for 6 years. You never answered them." The accusation was mild, but it still stung. "I never saw them," Marcus admitted. "They were filtered through the system, dismissed as the complaints of a convicted felon trying to avoid responsibility. I'm sorry I didn't know. I'm sorry no one listened." "But you're listening now," Malcolm said. "That matters, and maybe next time someone writes those letters, they'll reach a judge who remembers what happened to me and actually reads them. That's worth 6 years of being ignored." Deshaun Miller approached with his daughter still perched on his shoulders. "Emma, say hi to the judge." The little girl waved shyly. "Hi, Judge. Daddy says you're a good man." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Your daddy is a good man too. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." "I won't," Emma said seriously. "Daddy says we have to be brave and tell the truth even when it's hard. Your daddy is very wise." Deshaun set Emma down, and she scampered off to examine the courthouse steps with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Deshaun watched her go with an expression Marcus recognized, the look of a parent who'd almost lost everything and was still learning to breathe freely again. "I got partial custody last month," Deshaun said quietly. "My lawyer used your ruling to reopen the case, showed that my conviction was false, that I'd been wrongly imprisoned, that the system had failed me." The judge agreed. "Emma sleeps at my apartment 3 nights a week now. It's not full custody, but—" His voice broke. "It's a start." "It's more than a start," Marcus said firmly. "It's your life back. You're reclaiming it piece by piece, and that takes more courage than most people ever have to show." They talked for a while longer, Marcus listening to story after story of lives slowly being rebuilt. A woman whose son's record had been expunged, allowing him to apply to college. A man who'd been denied housing due to a false arrest that was now being removed from background checks. A teenager who'd been stopped constantly and was now working with Chief Martinez to train officers on community policing. Each story was a small victory, but together they formed something larger, a portrait of a system beginning slowly and imperfectly to correct itself. As the crowd thinned and the afternoon stretched toward evening, Marcus found himself alone on the courthouse steps, looking up at the new name gleaming in the fading light. The People's Federal Courthouse. Simple words carrying immense weight. "Quite a day," a familiar voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Judge Morrison climbing the steps, moving slowly on a cane she'd needed since knee surgery the previous year. "Elizabeth, I didn't know you were here." "Wouldn't have missed it." She settled beside him on the steps with a grateful sigh. "These old knees aren't what they used to be, but they got me here to witness history." "I'm not sure this qualifies as history," Marcus said. "Of course it does. Not the grand textbook kind, maybe, but the real kind. The kind where ordinary people demand better and actually get it, at least partially, at least for now." Morrison looked up at the building. "I've been a judge for 41 years, Marcus. I've seen a lot of injustice. But I've also seen change slow and painful and inadequate, but real. This is real." "Is it enough?" Marcus asked. "We've reformed one department, vacated some convictions, renamed a building. But the same system that enabled Doyle exists in 1,000 other counties. The same biases that led to my arrest are operating right now in police departments across the country." "Which is why we keep fighting," Morrison said simply. "You think changing the name of this courthouse solves everything? Of course not. But it reminds everyone who enters that justice belongs to the people, not to the powerful. It sets an expectation, and expectations shape behavior over time." Marcus considered this, watching the sun paint the courthouse walls in shades of gold and amber. "Sarah used to say that justice was like gardening," he said, thinking of his late wife. "You plant seeds, water them, pull weeds, and hope something grows. But you never see the final garden because it keeps growing long after you're gone." "Sarah was a wise woman," Morrison said, "and a fierce public defender. She'd be proud of what you've done here." "She'd tell me not to get comfortable," Marcus corrected. "She'd remind me that one victory doesn't win the war, that the work is never finished, that every day requires showing up and trying again." "Then that's what we do," Morrison said. "We show up, we try, we plant seeds and pull weeds, and trust that others will continue the work after we're gone." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell and lights came on in the courthouse windows, each one illuminating a different room where justice would be sought tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Imperfect justice, incomplete justice, but justice nonetheless. 6 months after the sentencing, Marcus presided over a case that felt like a full-circle moment. A young black man, 23 years old, arrested for disorderly conduct after questioning why a police officer had stopped him. The body camera footage showed exactly what Marcus expected. A polite young man asking reasonable questions met with escalating aggression from an officer who interpreted questions as challenges. The prosecution asked for jail time. The defense argued for dismissal. Marcus reviewed the footage 3 times, read the arrest report that bore no resemblance to the video evidence, and made his ruling. "The charges are dismissed with prejudice," he announced. "Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the U.S. Attorney for investigation of potential civil rights violations by the arresting officer. This court will not validate arrests based on wounded ego masquerading as law enforcement." The young man, whose name was Jerome Williams, stared at Marcus in shock. "You mean I'm free?" "You were always free," Marcus said gently. "This court is simply recognizing that fact. You did nothing wrong, Mr. Williams. You asked legitimate questions and were arrested for it. That's not disorderly conduct. That's a violation of your constitutional rights." Jerome's mother, sitting in the gallery, burst into tears. Her son had been facing 6 months in jail, which would have meant losing his job, his apartment, his momentum toward a better life. Now he was walking out of the courtroom with his record clean and his dignity intact. After the hearing, Jerome approached the bench. "Judge Langston, I saw the video. What happened to you, I mean? I'm sorry that happened, but I'm glad it did, because now someone understands." Marcus came around from the bench, no longer elevated, just 2 men talking. "I do understand, Jerome, and I'm sorry it took my experience for the system to start paying attention. You shouldn't have needed my privilege to receive justice. But I got justice today because of what you went through," Jerome said. "That means something. It means other people like me might get justice too." "That's the hope," Marcus agreed, "and the responsibility. Those of us with platforms have to use them, and those of us who've experienced injustice have to speak truth about it even when it's uncomfortable." "I will," Jerome promised. "Thank you, Judge." Marcus watched him leave with his mother, their arms around each other, and thought about Sarah's garden metaphor. Seeds planted. One case, one young man, one moment of justice that might prevent years of consequences. Small victories that accumulated into larger change. That evening, Marcus returned to his chambers and found a letter on his desk. The return address was the federal women's prison where Karen Doyle was serving her sentence. He almost threw it away. What could she possibly say that would matter? But curiosity won, and he opened the envelope. The letter was short, handwritten on lined paper in neat script that suggested Doyle had taken time to compose her thoughts carefully. Judge Langston, it began. I don't expect you to read this, and I don't deserve your time if you do, but I wanted you to know that I think about what I did every day. Not just what I did to you, but what I did to all those other people whose faces I'm finally allowing myself to remember. Malcolm Torres, Deshaun Miller, Jerome Williams, and dozens more whose names I'm learning from the case files the FBI shared with my attorney. I stole from them. Not property, but something more valuable, their time, their freedom, their belief that the system could be fair. I told myself I was keeping people safe, but I was really just feeding my own sense of power. I wanted to feel important, and I used other people's suffering to achieve that feeling. There's no apology adequate for that, no amends I can make from prison. All I can do is be honest about what I did and why, and hope that my honesty helps prevent other officers from making the same choices. I'm cooperating fully with Chief Martinez's investigation. I've identified every case where I crossed lines every time I pressured officers to support false narratives, every instance where I put conviction rates above truth. It's a long list, and reading it makes me sick. But it's the only contribution I can make now, complete transparency about how corruption flourished under my command. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that your courage to hold me accountable changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, believing the badge made me special. Now I understand it just made me responsible, and I failed that responsibility catastrophically. Thank you for not letting that failure continue. Karen Doyle. Marcus read the letter twice, then filed it carefully. He didn't respond. What would he say? But he kept it as evidence that people could change, even when that change came too late to undo their harm. A year after the assault, Marcus stood at Sarah's grave on what would have been their 25th anniversary. He came here every year, updating her on his life. Their daughter Michelle, the cases that kept him up at night, and the ones that restored his faith in the system. You would have loved this past year, he told the headstone, running his fingers over her name. Everything you fought for as a public defender, accountability, transparency, police reform, it's actually happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but happening. Martinez is changing the culture. The U.S. attorney is prosecuting civil rights violations that used to get ignored. Defense attorneys are filing motions citing my case as precedent. It's real change, Sarah. The kind you always believed was possible, even when I got cynical. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and autumn leaves. I wish you were here to see it, Marcus continued, but I think maybe you are seeing it in some way I don't understand. And I think you'd tell me the same thing you always did. Don't get comfortable, keep fighting. Remember that every case is someone's whole life. He placed fresh flowers on the grave white lilies that had been her favorite. I miss you, he said simply. Every day. But I'm trying to honor your memory by doing the work the way you taught me. With integrity, with compassion, and with the understanding that justice isn't about being right, it's about being fair. Walking back to his car, Marcus's phone rang. Sarah Chen calling with news about a case. Judge, you need to see this, she said, her voice excited. CNN is running a special report on police reform, and they're calling you the catalyst for a national movement. They've identified 17 different cities implementing reforms based on what happened here. Marcus paused by his car, looking back at Sarah's grave one more time. Send me the link. But Sarah, I want you to remember something. I'm not the catalyst. The hundreds of people who suffered before me, who spoke up and weren't believed, who fought battles that went nowhere. They're the catalysts. I'm just the one who happened to have a platform when the system finally failed in a way it couldn't hide. You're too modest, Judge. I'm accurate, Marcus corrected. Which is different. See you tomorrow morning. We have motions to review. 17 cities. Reform spreading because one police chief couldn't control her biases, because one judge refused to let injustice stand, because a system finally acknowledged its failures and tried to do better. Small victories accumulating into something larger. Seeds Sarah had planted growing into gardens she'd never see, but had always believed would bloom. Marcus drove home through streets that felt different now, safer somehow, though he knew that feeling was partially illusion. The work of justice was never finished. There would be more. Karen Doyle's, more abuses of power, more people who needed advocates they couldn't afford, and justice they couldn't access alone. But there would also be more Chief Martinez's, more officers like Rodriguez who found courage to speak truth. More defense attorneys who fought for clients the system wanted to forget. And there would be courthouses, not just in Millbrook County, but across the nation, where the principles of fairness and accountability mattered more than convenience or prejudice. The People's Federal Courthouse stood illuminated in the night, its name visible from blocks away, a promise carved in brass and backed by the hard-won reforms that gave those words meaning. Marcus pulled into his driveway and sat in the car for a moment, feeling the weight of the year settle on him, like a judicial robe heavy with responsibility, but also with purpose. Justice isn't blind, he thought. It sees everything. The good, the bad, the corruption, and the courage. It sees people for who they are, not what others assume them to be. And when it works imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely, it has the power to change lives, reshape systems, and remind everyone that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. He got out of the car and walked into his house, already thinking about tomorrow's docket, the motions waiting, the people seeking justice who deserved his best effort regardless of who they were or what they'd been accused of doing. Because that's what judges do. They show up. They listen. They apply the law fairly. And sometimes, when they're very lucky and very unlucky simultaneously, they get reminded why that work matters more than anything else in the world. Marcus Langston slept well that night, the first truly peaceful sleep since the morning Doyle's hand had struck his face. And when he woke, he put on his suit, straightened his tie, grabbed his briefcase, and drove to the People's Federal Courthouse to do it all again. Justice, after all, is a practice, not a destination, and the practice never ends.